Good morning, everybody. This is Diggs. It's another beautiful day out here in the Pacific Northwest. The heat has finally died down. Today, we are going to be talking about limited time units and limited time VCs. We're going to be talking about how many limited time units and limited time VCs are actually released, the rate at which Gumi tends to release them, and we're going to be taking a look at the total amount of limited time VCs and units that there are, along with the release schedule from the last 6 months to get some accurate data on whether or not there is too many limited time units. This has been a conversation that's been coming up in regards to GL Zazan and his limited time status. We won't be touching on whether or not I think he should be limited time or not. I think that's for another video, but we will be looking at the numbers. And if you have conclusions of your own, I would love to hear them down in the comments below. Let's go ahead and dig in. All right, everybody. So for the perspective of this video, since this can be a very large perspective, we're going to focus only on UR units and UR VCs. Maybe I'll do another video featuring MR units and MR VCs as well. But right now, I just wanted to capture the UR unit and UR VC percentages, since we did also look at the last 6 months as well. The first part of this video will be going over how many kind of globally UR units and VCs there are that are limited. And then we'll be taking a detailed look at some of the different perspectives people might be having, as well as ask some really powerful questions on what really constitutes limited and how you approach this question, right? So first off, taking a look at the UR units here, there are 61 different UR units. They are all listed here all the way up to GL Zazan's release tomorrow. The first thing that we have to do is kind of remove from this pool the 14 units that started in the game, because what we're interested in is understanding the units that were added to the game and how many of these units are limited time. So we're going to grab those units and we're going to go ahead and pluck them out. And what you're left with is 23 non-limited UR units and 24 limited units. Almost a 50% split here. Now, this is something we're going to look for when we do get to the 6-month perspective, because we do want to see if 50% is normal. Is Gumi consistently, there's the chat box, is Gumi consistently releasing at a 50% rate, and how are they kind of keeping it accurate? Another question to consider here, and this is going to kind of bring up the first question of perspective, is what kind of constitutes a limited time unit? And I think this is different for different players. And while it might seem pretty cut and dry, a lot of players, for example, with the Freyavia and Dwayne release coming up this week, already have Freyavia and Dwayne. Freyavia and Dwayne have had multiple banners, at least 3 in the last 6 months. So, you know, at what point are units kind of, have they been in the pool long enough to not be considered limited really anymore? Another question to consider would be Titus and 9S. Should they be considered limited since they were given for free? And another perspective to consider with this is the player perspective, right? What time did you start playing? If you're thinking about Titus and 9S, if you started playing months ago, Titus and 9S were free units that were given to everybody. So should they be considered limited units if they were given for free to everybody that was playing back then? Is that just kind of the price of entry for newer players that are coming late to the game? Where do we draw that line? And I think the new player perspective is pretty important here, and we'll be talking about the new player perspective when we get to the 6-month overview, because the percentages of limited time unit releases, if you're a newer player looking at all of these limited time units, or if potentially you're a free-to-play player that never decided to chase Dwayne or Freyavia, the percentages at which you would kind of perceive a limited time banner or a banner that you can't pull on would actually be a little bit higher than other players. Let's go ahead and take a look at VCs now. The total amount of VCs that are UR are 55. And again, this is up to date on the GL side. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing and pull some numbers from this. We're going to pull out 9 VCs because that is the total amount of starting UR VCs that were in the game when WoTV launched. We're going to take a look at the total amount of VCs which were added to the game since its creation, which has been 47 for UR, 33 of which are non-limited and 14 of which are limited. So interestingly, only 29% of the VCs added to the game have been limited so far. And this is something we're also going to look for in the 6-month breakdown to kind of mirror, right, a consistency from Gumi. Pulling up the 6-month breakdown now, we're going to transition kind of into this data sheet. And we have some interesting things going on here. We have in white, we have kind of the generally accessible units that were released. In blue, we have limited time VCs and units. And in red, we have rerun banners. So in total, there are 23 UR units on this page. That's if we are counting Halloween Leela, Halloween Raryu, Thancred, Dwayne, and Fryevia. Now, there are 9 new limited units, potentially, depending on your perspective, if you don't count Tidus or 9S, potentially 7, right? And there's a total repeat of 5 UR units. And what's interesting here is Dwayne and Fryevia have had 2 banners in the last 3 months. And for those of you that don't know, Dwayne kind of came out right around December. So he basically had 3 banners in the last 6 months. And what's interesting here is the perspective of kind of what we're looking at as a limited time unit and whether or not, you know, Dwayne and Fryevia, them being re-released, should be counted as a separate instance of limited time units being released, since there are so many players that do have access to this unit. I'm not going to say whether it should or shouldn't either way, but it's definitely something interesting to think about, because all of our percentages would have to be changed and skewed if we start looking at re-release banners. And then the next question would be, if we're looking at re-release banners for limited time units, why wouldn't we look at re-release banners for other units, right? And then it just kind of opens up an entire can of worms. For right now, I just put total rerun counting repeat. So if it does repeat, and for the math of this, we're just going to put 7. Out of the 21 VCs, 4 are limited, and of course Scions was a repeat. But let's kind of look at the math and break this down. So we've already determined that overall 50% of the units added to the game are limited, and about 30% of the vision cards added to the game are limited as well. In the context of the last 6 months, if you do not count the rerun banners, 50% of the units that were added to the game were limited, and 20% of VCs that were added to the game are limited. So it's actually skewed in the favor of non-limited vision cards, and it basically meets the standard of what Gumi and the rate at which Gumi is releasing. Now, where we might differ and have different opinions would be the context and perspective that the individual player has. So in the context of the last 6 months, if you want to count all the rerun banners that are coming out, right? And let's say you're a free-to-play player that doesn't pull on these limited time units, that would mean that 61% of the units that are released for you are considered limited, right? It's a pretty big percentage. Now, if you take it in the context of counting the rerun and the repeat banner, so that's going to be, you know, counting Dwayne and Fryevia coming out twice, you decided not to pull on that banner twice, that's going to be 64% of units that were released are limited for you. Now, of course, this is, you know, not taking into perspective the multiple banner releases of other units as well, which would definitely be something interesting to consider. Finally, we have my perspective, which is definitely a different perspective than a lot of the player base, but I think there are definitely players out there who think that like feel this way, but then are like very combative with a lot of the free-to-play players, calling like free-to-play players whiners and stuff. That's not something I particularly do. I try to understand all perspectives, but you have to understand from their perspective, this is how they're seeing it, right? This is from a whale's perspective. This is from, you know, someone who spends a lot of money on the game and gets these units. In the context of the last 6 months, if you count the rerun banners individually as non-limited units, which I do, right? I already have Thancred, I already have Freyevia, I already have Dwayne. If you count Tidus and 9S as non-limited, they're not limited for me. I've been playing for a long time. I knew I was going to easily be able to max them out, and I did. And, you know, for me, you know, if you don't have them, you'll get them when it comes around again, right? It's not like we're never going to see Final Fantasy X and near again. So for me, they're kind of considered not limited in my book. Now, in total, from my perspective, only 7 of the units were actually limited time units that released, and that's only 28% of the units that were actually released over the course of the month. Now, this is, of course, you know, taking into account we're adding the 7 repeat banners on here, right? We could do 7 out of 18 if we're not going to count the rerun banners, but even then it's going to be significantly lower than what a lot of people might be experiencing. And I think this is where, you know, a lot of the player strife and kind of the picking either on free-to-play players or players who, you know, complain or feel at odds with limited time units being released so often is, you know, maybe they're new players, maybe they can't catch up, maybe all of these banners are new for them. So my goal with this video was to try and paint some perspective for you guys on how, depending on your playstyle, depending on how you look at the various banners that are released, you know, it could be quite a different perspective. And for those that are actually trying to make a case against Gumi, what I would say is if we're taking the last 6 months of data into account, it actually matches overall basically the entire UR limited unit releases that have come out. Same with VCs, and it's actually in favor of non-limited units. So unless you want to compare this to maybe another game, it actually seems like Gumi is not doing anything in particularly too wrong. There is also another thing to consider here, which would be the idea of double cost units, but really we haven't had very many true double cost units released. There's also the aspect of like maybe Dwayne should be counted twice since he's a double cost unit, right? So there's questions like that, which, you know, if we're going to factor that in, can get a little complicated, but there really has been no true double cost unit released probably since Ruinstern, I would think. Because I mean, we had King Mont, who was at regular pull rate. We had Black Rose Helena, who was regular shard cost, even though her pull rate was not. So we're kind of in an interesting place with the double cost. And I actually, like, I'm feeling right now like Gumi has not done like too terrible of evil. But again, my goal with this video was just to put out the numbers, talk about it candidly, talk about some different perspectives, and kind of get the word out there. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you're angry at me, please leave an angry comment down below and thumbs down this video. If you're happy with me, make sure you swing by my stream tonight and say hi. You can always use my affiliate link, dig.gs/coins, to support me, and have a great rest of your day.